Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm delighted to have you join us today for our Spotlight on Collections program entitled Truth in Pigment, Pivotal Discoveries from the Universal Map of the Qing Empire. I'm Erin Murphy, and I'm the James Needham Chief Conservator here at Weissman Preservation Center and Collections Care at Harvard Library Preservation Services. The map that we'll hear about today is a representative of Harvard Library's diverse collections, which support intellectual exploration and discovery for students, faculty, and researchers. These collections are at the heart of Harvard's educational mission, and at Harvard Library Preservation Services, our mission is to ensure the longevity and usability of these renowned collections. For over a decade, our Spotlight on Collections events have given us an opportunity to more broadly share what usually goes on behind the scenes at Harvard Library. And that is the collaborative work of our conservators, Harvard's curators and librarians, and the faculty and researchers who use the collections of over 25 subject-based libraries here at Harvard. The outcome of these collaborations inevitably deepen our understanding of a place, time, or culture through the contributions of these experts. As you'll learn in the case of the universal map of the Qing Empire, these collaborations, which were largely carried out during the COVID-19 pandemic, contributed new information to the cartographic history of China during this era. This work exemplifies Harvard Library's commitment to research, teaching, and learning, and our conservation staff are proud to contribute to these advances in scholarship. Our speakers today will share their perspectives about how this map came into Harvard's collections, the importance of the map to ongoing scholarship, and the process of examination and analysis that led to new discoveries about these blue maps of China. Our speakers today include Jidong Yang, who is the librarian at the Harvard Yenching Library. Prior to joining Harvard last year, Jidong has held positions as the Chinese Studies Librarian at the University of Pennsylvania, the head of the Asia Library at the University of Michigan, and the head of the East Asia Library at Stanford University. Dr. Richard Pegg is currently the director and curator of Asian art for the McLean Collection, a private Asian art museum and separate map library located north of Chicago, Illinois. Dr. Pegg has written and lectured widely on the visual, literary, cartographic, and martial arts traditions of East Asia. He's the author of Cartographic Traditions in East Asian Maps, published in 2014, and co-author of the upcoming publication, Correlating Heaven and Earth, the Blue Maps of China, which will be released in 2024. Deborah Mayer is currently the conservator for analytical services and technical imaging at the Weissman Preservation Center here at Harvard, where she specializes in, where she provides specialized examination, analysis, and imaging of Harvard Library collections. Deborah earned a Master's of Science from the Winterthur University of Delaware Art Conservation Program, where she studied paper conservation. She's a fellow of the American Institute for Conservation, an expert in the analysis of materials used in papermaking, and a dedicated teacher of fiber microscopy. At the end of our program, we'll have time for questions, but you are all invited to submit your questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So let's start our program. Our first speaker will be Jidong Yang. Jidong?
Thank you, Erin. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all very much for participating in this webinar featuring the Harvard Yenching Library and its treasures. I would like to start today's program with a very brief introduction to the history of the Harvard Yenching Library. This branch library at Harvard was first established in the late 1920s. At that time, it was a part of the Harvard Yenching Institute and was named the Chinese and Japanese Library. You probably know that in the 1920s, Korea was not an independent country. It was a Japanese colony. So the name of the library includes Chinese and Japanese only. The Harvard Engineering Institute was co-founded by the Harvard University and the Yanjing University in Beijing, China, to promote higher education in Asia. This institute still exists today, supporting many academic programs related with Asian studies. The Yanjing University, which was a Christian university founded by the American Presbyterian missionary John Stewart, was disbanded in 1952, shortly after the communists took over the control of China. The Yanjing University's beautiful campus was then given by the Chinese government to Peking University or Beijing University, which is now one of the top-ranking universities in China. However, as of today, more than 70 years after Yanjing University was disbanded, the Harvard Engineering Institute still keeps the word Yanjing in its name to commemorate its historical partnership with Yanjing University. During the late 1940s, when World War II ended and Korea became an independent country, the Chinese and the Japanese Library of the Harvard Engineering Institute expanded its collection scope to Korea and later to Vietnam. As the Korean and the Vietnamese collections grew, the library's name was changed to the Harvard Engineering Library in 1959. It remained a part of the Harvard Engineering Institute until 1975, when it was merged into the Harvard Library system. Today, the Harvard Engineering Library is the third largest library on Harvard campus, next only to Widener Library and the Law School Library. It is also the largest academic library in East Asian languages outside East Asia itself. In addition to more than 1.7 million physical items and numerous digital resources, we have the largest special collection in East Asian languages in North America, which contains many unique and rare materials. Every year, scholars come from all over the world to the reading rooms of the Harvard Engineering Library to look for primary source materials they need for their research on Asia. Next slide, please. The map we are going to talk about today in today's webinar are two very good examples of the treasures of the Harvard Engineering Library. We have two copies or two rubbings of this map, which was originally carved on a stone tablet. The title of the map is 大清万年一统地理全图 in Chinese, which can be roughly translated into English as the Universal Map of the Qing Empire. One of the copies we have was purchased from an antique book dealer in Tokyo, Japan in 1958. The photos in this slide shows the price we paid for this copy in 1958, which was 825,000 Japanese yen. Unfortunately, we don't know from where we acquired this other copy of this map, although we do know from a stamp on the case of the map that it was accessioned to the Harvard Engineering Library in 1962. So now I turn it over to Richard for more details about the map.
Thank you, Jidong. And before we get started, a big thank you to the Weissman and Harvard Yanjing for making their collections accessible and for enabling a very important aspect of my own research to be realized in a timely way, in spite of COVID. If we get the next slide. So what I would my focus will be the history of my relationship with these blue maps. The McLean collection, I've been here almost 20 years. In 2005, we acquired the map that you see here. It's mounted as a screen, as you can see, an 8-panel folding screen in Japanese/Korean manner. And so my journey with all of this began in 2005. In 2014, I published a book, Cartographic Traditions in East Asian Maps, that really presented some very preliminary studies about these blue maps. When I began that project, I was just looking at maps that were East Asian maps within the Maclean collection. And there was very little published about these blue maps. There was a little bit about the history of some of the map makers associated with it in Chinese. On the terrestrial map, and as we'll see in a moment, the celestial map, there was a little bit done in Japanese, but really very little at the time. And certainly my preliminary findings didn't go into any depth on this topic. Next slide. So once the book came out, dealers, collectors, other collections, libraries started letting me know about versions of the blue map that they had in their collections. And I sort of affectionately became known as the blue map guy. So I would get every few months a notification that someone had one in their collection, or they had discovered one in their collection. Could I tell them what there is about it? And probably within a year or so, I realized that there was a mate to the terrestrial map that we had acquired for this collection, that there was a related star chart. And so the original conceptual framework was a terrestrial map and a celestial map created at about the same time, but intentionally meant to be a pair, a set. Next slide. Fade a couple of years, 2018, a young postdoc named Elka Papalitsky was a map fellow here at the Maclean collection. She's now an associate professor, just started this fall at Oslo University. And while she was here, she looked at our copy and she started pulling up other versions of the terrestrial one, and she noticed very slight differences between them. And I had sort of made an assumption that there was just one addition to these maps. And it was really Elka who brought this to my attention. And in the following year, she and I were, that's her in all of the photos you see across the bottom. The one that's in the center in Leiden, she and I were at a conference, went down to see this map. And it's at that moment that I said to her, would you be interested in doing a book on this project? I think that this is sort of snowballing into something that's really interesting. And so our book project is, the working title currently is Correlating Heaven and Earth, the Blue Maps of China. And its focus is very much on material culture, late Qing history, and the history of science and technology. And so we began to go and look at maps all around the world. You see photos, two from Japan. These were from a recent trip in June, where we went all over Japan looking for blue maps. So she has become a very important colleague, collaborator, co-author, friend, and has very much helped push this project forward. Next slide. So over the course of the last few years, we have discovered, and the example you see on the left, the terrestrial map, is the one of the two that is in Harvard's collection, that there are in fact 10 different editions of the terrestrial map produced between 1812 and 1826. We've discovered so far 46 copies. For the celestial chart, there are 4 editions produced in 1822 and 1826, and we've discovered 14 known copies so far. Next slide. So the 2 that are in Harvard's collection are the type E. So of those 10 editions, we've simply named them A through J, chronologically, essentially, starting from 1812 up to about 1825, 1826. Both copies that are in Harvard are of the type E type, and thus far we've found 17 known copies. So these aren't specifically dated, but there are place names and administrative names that change over the course of the production of these maps that help us give a window, this 5-year window of 1815 to 1820. Next slide. So we advance, my chronology advances to October 2020 when I contacted Mr. Ma. Harvard Yanjing had digitized one of their blue maps. And so I reached out to him to ask about doing pigment analysis. I had sort of made this assumption going in that it was indigo, but I had suspicions that it might be something else. At the time, he said, yes, absolutely, we'd be interested in doing that. I knew he had done color pigment analysis for Dunhuang related material earlier, so I knew he was a person who would completely understand what I was looking for and wanted to achieve. Fade 6 months to April 21, and Annie Shi Wong gave me a virtual tour over Facebook of the two copies. And so I knew they had the one copy, and she said, do you want to see the other copy? And I said, other copy, what other copy? And so it wasn't in the, it wasn't in the Harvard's database at the time. And so she took out these and showed me these two scrolls. So if we go to the next slide. Two things became immediately apparent. So one of the formats that the Harvard's blue maps are, one is mounted in Japan and folded into a book style. This is a standard Japanese presentation style. And actually the copy that's in Leiden is also mounted in the same way. The other copy is unmounted sheets, loose sheets. So it's 8 single scrolls. The original production model for these is to have these mounted as hanging scrolls. And the example that you see here is in the British Library, and they're mounted in China as 8 separate hanging scrolls and would be hung on a wall as a kind of presentation piece. It was, in fact, looking at this for the second time, this particular one in the British Library, that I noticed this really bright blueness to the pigment. And I said, indigo blue can't ever achieve that. There's something else going on here. And so this is an example of that format, next slide, of the hanging scroll format. But what's interesting about, and you look in the bottom right, the 8 unmounted loose sheets at Harvard, it was my assumption that these were sold as loose sheets at the time of production into Japan. The reason for that is they're immediately mounted into screens, fusuma, sliding doors, as you can see, and the 2 examples in the lower left where they're mounted in a Japanese style, the one in Leiden and the one that's in Harvard. And that shot from Harvard, you can see that it unfolds into a larger presentation format. So this was very important, that I had confirmation that these maps were originally sold as loose sheets. In terms of production and mounting practices, this was an important piece of information that Harvard's library was able to provide for me. Next slide. So then the question was, what was the pigment? I've given you a dozen examples here, and you can see, even given that these were all shot under different conditions, you get a range of blues that are presented here. So I was quite curious as to what it could be. And so quite excited when Harvard Yanjing was happy to send it. You guys have on campus a conservation center that's able to do the spectral analysis and pigment analysis. So that was my first question. Next slide. The second question that I was curious about was, how was this printed? What was the production model? It had, given the scale of this, so it's 8 scrolls, each one is about 4+ feet tall, and all 8 scrolls widthwise, it's about 7 feet wide. So this is a massive production process involved in putting these together. So the kinds of things, once I knew that the Weissman was involved, yes, pigment analysis was definitely something I was interested in, but I was also interested in other material qualities of the production. How is it produced? Can we discern anything about the production process? What was the paper produced? What type of paper was used? Again, my expectation was of a particular type of paper. As it turns out, Deborah is one of the world's experts on paper fiber analysis. And so this collaboration became very exciting for me, and the fact that literally the day after she received these, she did the spectral analysis. She had to go out and get comparative. She got as excited about this project as I had already been for the previous, whatever it was at that point, 15, 16 years. I think I have one more slide. Yeah, so just making available. So all of this kinds of information, some of the pigment analysis will be coming out in a book called Maps and Colors. I did an analysis just for the example that's in Leiden. There's lots of really interesting history in terms of its as an object and its history traveling from Japan, from China to Japan, back to the Netherlands. There will be an exhibition that I'll mention again at closing. That'll be at the Boston Public Library next May. And so I'm creating a digital catalog for that. And then Elka Papalitsky and my book, Correlating Heaven and Earth, The Blue Maps of China. It will be soon under review at University of Chicago Press. I know we said it was 2024, fingers crossed that in fact it can happen in the next year, but production is not something I have any kind of control over. So that's my really, it's really difficult for me to talk about 18 years of research in whatever 10, 12 minutes I've just taken. But at this point, I'd like to pass it over to Deborah to talk about some of the analysis that Weissman was able to do.
So thank you, Dr. Pegg. And he's right. I definitely got the bug from day one. And hello, everyone. I like to jump into the story that I like to tell about the technical analysis. Next slide, please. So you know I'm Deborah Mayer, and I'm sharing with you the technical investigation of the blue maps carried out at the Weissman Preservation Center. For those who don't know, the Weissman Center is part of Harvard Library's Preservation Services and is responsible for the conservation of rare and unique special collections across Harvard libraries for use in classes, exhibitions, and research, or to be photographed for digital access. Additionally, we offer technical imaging and analysis to help answer research questions, one of my favorite things to do. Seen here are images of the Weissman Center. The image on the right shows a teaching and learning moment, discussions about the blue maps with Dr. Pegg, conservators, and other library staff. Next. So how did the analysis and collaborations begin? In the spring of 2021, still during the pandemic, Dr. Pegg contacted Harvard Yingqing Library, who reached out to us to help identify the blue color on the ink on the printed maps. These images bring back the joy of seeing the maps for the first time in our lab. We were struck by their incredible beauty, the intensity of the blue color, and their large size. As Dr. Pegg mentioned, the maps are composed of 8 panels, and Harvard has 2 copies. One is mounted and folded in a book format, and the other is unmounted and rolled. Having 2 copies in one place for comparative study is extraordinary. Seen here is a Zoom conservation between conservators and Dr. Pegg, with a special video camera to magnify and image details. This was a remarkable day for me, marking the beginning of our collaboration. Dr. Pegg's pressing question, is the blue ink indigo, a traditional colorant used throughout Asia since antiquity? We couldn't say by visual observation alone and would need to perform a series of analytical examinations. During the conversation, other questions arose. Are there two colorants, one darker, one lighter? How were the prints made, and what kind of paper was used? I'll address each of these questions and conclude with the treatment of the unmounted panels. Next. Shown here are the blue colorants available when the maps were printed. Each has different shades depending on the binder, manufacturing, and application. Below the swatches are the color's common name, chemical name, and formula. The chemical formula includes the elements that make up the color, and those elements are a key diagnostic feature when identifying unknowns. For example, if the color is azurite, then copper must be present in our findings. Next. We focused our work on the two most likely colorants, indigo and Prussian blue. The colors appear similar, both at high concentrations and with dilute washes. As you can see, under normal illumination, these colors are difficult to distinguish with accuracy. So what separates them? Indigo is naturally occurring colorant made from plants, without any useful elements for diagnostic identification. Prussian blue, in contrast, contains iron and a ferrocyanide group, both of which are diagnostic features and identification, a fingerprint for this colorant. And a historical difference. Indigo has been used since antiquity, whereas Prussian blue was first synthesized in Germany in the early 18th century and not believed to be used in China until the mid-19th century. Next. To answer the question of color, three complementary, non-invasive analytical techniques were used: infrared and multispectral imaging, X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy, and Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy. None of these techniques involve removing a sample or even touching the object. The video spectral comparator, seen here with pigment reference sets in the foreground, was used first. It is a multispectral imaging tool for the diagnostic examination of documents and artwork utilizing wavelengths from ultraviolet to visible to near infrared. The response of the colorant to the different wavelengths can be imaged and measured and used for material identification. Next. Seen here are images of the map in normal light and again with infrared. On top of the map are vials of Prussian blue and indigo as reference samples to simultaneously evaluate whether the blue ink on the map and the blue reference samples responded the same or differently. You can see that the map blue went dark in infrared, as did the vial of Prussian blue, while the vial of indigo became white. The spectral response of Prussian blue and indigo in infrared is completely opposite. This is a quick way to distinguish these colorants. But even better, on the right are the spectral fingerprints for indigo in red, Prussian blue in green, and the unknown blue ink of the map in blue. While all three are similar in normal human vision, indigo has a very different fingerprint in the infrared region. The Prussian blue reference and the unknown blue ink of the map have nearly identical fingerprints. Based on infrared imaging and the spectral reflectance curves, we can confidently conclude that the unknown blue ink of the map is Prussian blue. But we didn't stop there. Next. To further confirm that this result, we needed to verify that iron, the primary element in Prussian blue, was present. For that, we used X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy, which measures the energies emitted from material when excited by X-rays, and these energies correspond to specific elements. The spectra of both the blue and the greener inks confirm the presence of iron, consistent with Prussian blue. And really how handy for us, because Prussian blue is the only blue that contains iron. Trace amounts of other elements were present, and they are from the paper and the manufacturing of Prussian blue. Importantly, no elements were detected to suggest any other blue colorants were used. But what about organic colorants not detectable with X-ray fluorescence? Next. To address the presence of organic compounds, the blue ink was analyzed using a Fourier transform infrared microscope. The work was carried out in partnership with Dr. Arthur McClellan from Harvard's Center for Nanoscale Systems. The spectra of the blue and greener inks displayed an absorption band characteristic of the cyano-functional group in Prussian blue. The results did not suggest that any organic colorant, such as indigo or yellow, was used in combination with the Prussian blue to alter the tones. In summary, the combination of these three analytical techniques proved that the only colorant in the ink was Prussian blue, and that the tonal variations are primarily a result of decreasing concentrations rather than an additional colorant. Next. Putting color aside, how were the maps printed? We knew from the outset that the maps were relief printed. Is it a rubbing or a wood block print? We weren't sure. Both are made from a carved and incised block. With rubbings, shown on the left, paper is tamped down and pushed into the block voids, then inked with a dauber. The negative areas remain uninked. The resulting print reads exactly as it was carved, meaning it is not reversed, and the negative areas, which read as white, are depressions in the paper. In contrast, in woodblock printing, seen on the right, ink is applied directly to the printing block and transferred to the paper with pressure. The resulting print is in reverse, and the negative white areas are raised. Next. Setting the deformation of the paper was key in figuring out that the printing technique was a rubbing, and underscores the importance of detailed examination with magnification in making determinations. The image on the left is a detail of a character formed from the paper being squished into the negative areas of the printing block. The paper is uninked, recessed, and wrinkled from manipulation, displaying typical paper distortions indicative of rubbings. In the image on the right, small circular depressions suggest a blunt needle or an awl-like tool was used to ease the paper into the grooves in the block. This is a common technique used in rubbings to coax the paper into narrow crevices of the printing block. The fine detail of the map requires such manipulation to achieve a good impression. Next. Next, please. Notice the weave imprint in the ink made by the cloth dauber, which is visible in both. Oh, back one, please. Thank you. Notice the weave imprint in the ink made by the cloth dauber, which is visible in both images. This is another indicator of the rubbing process. As seen on the right, the ink application was layered, with the lighter tone of Prussian blue applied first and the darker tones second. Next. On to the question of paper type. Each of the 8 panels is printed on a single sheet of handmade paper, about 52 inches long. It is white, thin, and has a smooth surface, all ideal features for capturing fine detail in printing. Each panel was previously backed with a secondary sheet of Asian paper, darker and thicker than the print. Where the papers became separated, the laid lines of the print paper became visible. The physical features of the paper, including the narrow-spaced laid lines, led us to surmise it was Xuan paper, a treasured paper in China, made in the Anhui province, and is praised for printing and calligraphy. Next. To confirm the fiber composition of the paper, and with approval from Harvard Yenching Library, tiny samples were removed and examined with a polarizing light microscope. The dispersed fiber samples were treated with a chemically reactive indicator stain to help in fiber identification. That is why the fibers are colored in these images. I'm sure it looks like a tangled mess, but to me, it is spectacular. The fibers of winged celtis are long and stained reddish, primarily seen in the scene spanning the right image. The right stem fibers are bluish, shorter and narrower, and include other cellular elements stained both pink and blue. Colleagues at the Peking University Library and the National Library of China confirmed the fiber content exemplified Xuan paper. They added that the inclusion of the rice stem fibers, which are short and narrow, give the paper ideal qualities such as smoothness and good ink absorbency to make delicate rubbings from blocks with fine detail, as these maps have. Consulting with specialists in Asian materials was rewarding and a valuable contribution. Next. Now, the final segment of the presentation, conservation, treatment, and storage. The conservation goals were to stabilize the map for handling, retain historical evidence, and improve storage for access. To achieve this, creases obscuring text and design were minimized, areas of separation between the print and the secondary papers were pasted back together, and tears and losses were reinforced when they posed a risk for handling, such as those along the top edge. The before and after treatment images show the gentle stabilization treatment of the map panels that make access and imaging possible. Next. Originally, all 8 panels were rolled together and stored in the Asian-style box shown in the top left. To reduce unnecessary handling and prevent transfer of the blue color, each panel was individually rolled and placed in a separate compartment within a custom-made box. Each section was fitted with an inert foam that keeps the roll in place. Space was made to retain the original storage box. Storage design considered both the needs of the map and access at Harvard Yenching Library. Box labeling and handling instructions were in English and Chinese. These considerations are another example of the collaboration between Harvard Yenching Library and the Weissman Center. Next. Before Dr. Pegg rejoins the presentation for final insights, I want to express my gratitude to the colleagues listed here who made the project both possible and truly collaborative. I thank them all. And now, Dr. Pegg, please join in.
Well, thank you, Deborah. I have one postscript for those of you curious. We have had other copies subsequently tested of the Celestial to confirm that, in fact, it's Prussian blue and made in the same process. Our own copy has been tested, as well as there's an edition of the terrestrial that was printed in black ink, which we also have in our collection. So that sort of was a continuation of, and we've asked lots of other institutions to proceed with that kind of testing. to sort of cap or summarize that the information that Deborah was able to glean, and her team and all of the people who collaborated on this, the historical significance of these findings is enormous. In terms of production models, we have the process of a rubbing. So typically rubbings are made from historical stone monuments. And so the fact that the makers of the blue maps carved large blocks in the positive to make a positive rubbing from is quite unique in production methodologies for printmaking in China. The use of Prussian blue, as Deborah mentioned, previously we had thought that about 1850, when Prussian blue was used, there was some pigment analysis done on paper monies that were printed at that time. So this pushes that timeline back another 30 years plus, and really goes to the fact that indigenous or locally sourced and made Prussian blue began to be created sometime in the first decade of the 19th century. And these blue maps were the first use of that in China and in all of East Asia for locally produced Prussian blue on this scale. In addition, I think it's because of this production model and the use of Prussian blue in China that it becomes immensely popular in Japan in the 1830s as a result of widespread distribution of these maps. So historically, the discovery of the use of Prussian blue is enormous. And the other important material factor that Deborah was able to discover was the type of paper. And I know has sort of teased out a little bit, but typically there's two kinds of paper that are used typically for rubbings. It's a bamboo-based paper. Bamboo has a higher tensile strength, and it's a shorter fiber, correct me if I'm wrong, so that when you're trying to bend it into those empty spaces, it has less of a tendency to break because it'll actually just part and open. So once we discovered that it was a rubbing process, my expectation was that it would be a bamboo-based paper. When she told me that it's a Schwen-based paper, this is typically used for high-end production of calligraphy and painting in historical China. But what's interesting about the particular type of Schwen paper is it's a low-grade Schwen paper. It's not the high-end with a higher, sandalwood, whatever it's called, winged cedulus, whatever the Latin name of it is. That typically is a higher percentage in comparison to the amount of rice fibers found in there. This has a relatively low example. So it's something in between, which is, again, another unique aspect about the production model for these maps. Unique paper, unique colorant, unique process. Everything about these maps is quite extraordinary in terms of its production model. In terms of their scale and scope, we have no other large format blue maps like this produced anywhere else in the world. So this is a unique production scale. So that's just what I want to kind of close with, that how important that the discoveries and this kind of collaboration. I'm an art historian by training, but when we can use science in a really important way to better understand the material culture and production methodologies for things like this, it enhances our understanding of the historical past, and it's quite fantastic. And my final note is that those of you in the Boston area who are interested in seeing a terrestrial and a celestial together, there'll be an exhibition that opens in the beginning of May of 2024 at the Boston Public Library, the Leventhal Map and Education Center. It's a small exhibition. We're borrowing things from Harvard's collections, from the Map Library, as well as Harvard Yanjing. It's a fairly small show. There's only 7 objects in the whole show, but it centralizes and sort of unpacks not just the production methods, but also the content and the implications, the historical implications of the maps when they were made at that time in the early part of the 19th century. So with that, I think we could ask Ji Dong to come back in, and we would be happy to field any questions, all questions.
Thank you, Richard and Deborah and Ji Dong. We actually do have a question in the chat, and it's about rubbing. So probably any of you can take this question. The question is, was the rubbing matrix always stone, or could wood be used for rubbings?
So in this case, that's a very good question. And yes, typically rubbings are made from stone, as I alluded to. So I mentioned that we've discovered 10 editions of the blue map from 1812 to 1826. The very first edition, and I think we've only found 2 or 3 so far. In fact, there's a small inscription that tells us that it was made from stone. And so the very first edition of the blue terrestrial map was in fact carved in stone. My guess is they wanted to be able to modify it, thus the 10 different editions. And in many cases, the different editions can be a very small thing. There can be a date, or it can be the name of a studio, all of them localizing it to production in Suzhou, which is very important. I think another assumption we had, or I certainly had, was that these were produced in Beijing, but they're not. They're not in Suzhou. So the additional 9 editions were all carved in woodblock. Again, to carve in woodblock and use the rubbing methodology is highly unusual, very unusual. To carve in the positive, apply the paper, and then ink the paper, a positive from a positive. This is an immensely, so each one of those is hand colored. 2 things result. One is every single copy is unique because it is hand colored. When you do typical woodblock, the ink is typically very uniformly applied to the block and then pressure applied with the paper, and you pull away a positive image from a negative carved block. So this production model for the blue maps is, I can't emphasize it enough, how unusual it is at every level, every category. They're fantastic. As you can see, I get excited about this. You've got me, I've been talking about it for an hour now.
You should get excited. They're beautiful, beautiful maps, and there's a lot to know about them.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Pegg. We have another great question from our audience. What, if anything, can you tell us about the people who created these objects? I was just thinking the same thing. Can you tell different hands?
So the different editions, that's a complicated question and not an easy one to answer. So we only have one definitive historical person associated with all 14 productions. That's 14 editions. That's a terrestrial and the celestial. And it's the very last celestial produced in 1826 in May that has a signature for someone that's a historical person. This person's a calligrapher, a collector of rubbings. He lives near Suzhou. So there's a lot of information that sort of leads us to that. But in terms of the carving of the artisans, the craftsmen who actually carved the blocks, yes, between each of the editions, in some cases, a toponym, a place name, will appear white on blue. In other cases, it'll appear blue on white, which means that an entirely different aesthetic has been implied between the editions. Again, sort of my assumption was when I had bought mine in 2005, and there were like 2 other ones online at that time, was I had no idea. I assumed they were all the same. There's other kinds of things. Another thing that's nice about the Harvard unmounted one is along one edge are title slips. So the original, this is how we know that these were meant to be hanging scrolls, because these maps would be mounted onto a scroll format. And when they're not on view and stored, they're rolled up. And typically on the outside, the mount maker would put a little slip and he'd put the title on it, or someone would write the title on it. The fact that in the production, that the makers of the maps thought about what's typically a completely separate atelier, different craftsmen, not associated in any way, added these slips. They have a short title and they're numbered 1 through 8, one for each. The example that's actually, you can't quite make it out behind Jidong right now, but it's there all the way on the far right. You can see sort of the bright white of the title. Immediately to its right is this strip. When they were mounted in China, they're cut off because they're supposed to be on the outside. When they went to Japan, the Japanese mount makers would never have considered, if you can imagine bringing your painting to a frame shop and the guy says, oh, I'm just going to trim this edge off so it'll fit better in the frame. You wouldn't even think about it. A mount maker never thinks about altering in any way the original artwork. And so or a great percentage of the ones that are found in Japan still have all the title slips on them. Ours, mounted as a screen, has the title slips. So again, when I looked at ours, I assumed they all did. And it didn't occur to me until I saw the set mounted in the British Library, where those were trimmed off. We have a couple of examples where probably the printer forgot to add that to the first sheet of the map, and it's actually between the 7th and the 8th. And we have an example, it's actually here at the Regenstein at the University of Chicago Library, where the title slips are in the middle of the map. Like the map goes, and then right in the middle is this strip of 8 title slips. So quite obviously they were meant to be taken off and mounted. So again, this is a highly unusual practice for a production model. I know I answered the question was about the difference between stone and wood, but you know, you put a nickel in and you'll get $50 out, literally.
So it sounds like there's quite a bit known about the production and the distribution, or you know a lot about that now, right? Yep. But maybe an area of research for anyone out there looking for research a project is a little bit more about the actual people and the workshops. They're like similarly, like we know a lot about Renaissance Italian painters and their workshops, right? But that scholarship just hasn't been done in this area, it sounds like.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So who was making these and who was the audience? I think is where that goes to. The fact that we have a terrestrial and celestial on this scale is, in addition, highly unusual. They're modeled after a set of celestial and terrestrial maps that are made in the 1190s. That in 1247 are then, because they're considered so important, carved into stone. The steles for these, something that since 1247 people have been making rubbings of, are located in Suzhou, the place of production. So everything sort of takes us back to Suzhou, and so this historical model created begun in the late 12th century and then sort of literally set in stone in the following 13th century, becomes a model. Those were made, and the intention of those at the time, they were teaching tools for the young prince before he became the emperor of China. And so the terrestrial is a model for a period. So those of you not familiar historically, the Southern Song period, which takes place from 1120s up until the 1260s to 1270s, is referred to as the Southern Song because a northern nomadic peoples, the Jin, the Jurchens, create the Jin dynasty in northern China, and the capital has to move to the south. So this Southern Song is a period when the Han Chinese, the ethnically Han Chinese, would like a return to the previous Northern Song period before this happened. I think that ethnically Han scholars in Suzhou in the early part of the 19th century, right after the Qianlong Emperor, who ruled for 60 years, so 3 successive emperors have ruled for almost 200 years. The Qing dynasty is a Manchu-ruled people. This is a northern nomadic people who have taken over China. And I think that this is a subtle and covert protest by ethnically Han Chinese against Manchu rule, that it's time for the Manchus to go. And the reason that I think part of the reason that the production model is we have the terrestrial first, where that's not overt, but the fact that they then create the celestial as a pair, as an intentional pair, referencing the historical past, I think that there's a very intentional political statement that's being made with the production of these blue maps. So the audience, the reason that no one signs it is because some things never change. If you are writing political protest in China, bad things can happen to you and your family and everyone you know, and you disappear. This is a phenomenon that's been going on for thousands of years. I'm not making necessarily any immediate associations, but this is a historical process. And so this is part of the reason, this was part of the challenge for Dr. Pepelitsky and myself, was who were the makers? Who was the audience for this? Now we know so much about its production. We know so much about the information that's in them, the maps themselves, and the historical models that are used for it. So we only have the one clue. And what's interesting is it's the very last production, the very last image that we get an actual historical person mentioned. And I think essentially he's saying, hey, we've been making this statement now for 14 years. Nobody's caught on. I'm willing to go out on a limb and say, hey, here's my name. This is what we think.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
This story has it all. So unfortunately, we are at the end of our program, and I feel like we just got it going.
Yep.
So I want to thank all our speakers and all the folks behind the scenes here. For our audience, Dr. Pegg has a book coming out, and as he mentioned, an exhibition at the Boston Public Library. And for all of those who are very interested in this type of subject, please take a look at Yan Qing's collections. It's kind of mind-blowing. So thank you all for joining us today.